Welcome to the Gateway Radio Program, a weekly radio series discussing the issues of human potential and technologies. The Gateway Radio Program is brought to you by the Monroe Institute, a research and educational organization dedicated to the exploration of conscious awareness. Here now is your host of the Gateway Radio Program, Mark Serta.
Welcome to another edition of the Gateway Radio Program. I'm Mark Serto. You know, with the topics of managed healthcare being such a hot issue in today's national news, we find ourselves confronted with having to try to expedite our healing when dealing with any sort of surgical procedure. Western medicine has provided us with a ton of miraculous surgical procedures that have really been life-saving. These, of course, are very costly, and our healthcare costs continue to rise through the ceiling. Not surprisingly, insurance companies are not really wanting to pay for extended hospital stays, and they move the patient out very quickly and oftentimes leave them to convalesce in the home instead of in the hospital. As a remedy to this problem, there's also a growing trend at a grassroots movement, and now not so grassroots anymore, in something called alternative therapies. They are controversial in nature, because really over the course of the past 100 years, there hasn't been a lot of scientific data to support the successes of these in the eyes of Western medicine until now. There's a lot of work being done in that area. With me today to discuss these issues are two ladies of distinction, both of whom have done an extended amount of work to try and either verify or apply these esoteric medical practices. Gari Carter is with us via phone from her home in Florida. She is a healer, practitioner of polarity therapy, Reiki, and therapeutic touch. She's also an author of a must-read book called Healing Myself. She lectures frequently. And here in the studio with me is Justine Owens, who is a researcher at the University of Virginia's CSCAT program. It's a clinical study of alternative therapies. She's also a cognitive psychologist and a clinical researcher. And what else do you do?
Well, I'm an experimental psychologist with a specialty in cognitive psychology, but now doing healthcare research, as you said, in alternative and complementary therapies. The connection there is mind-body connection, which is something that's been the focus of my work all along and is especially important for the revolution that we're in the healthcare system. People really want a lot more attention paid to their experiential life and their mind-body connections. And with the recognition of the effects of stress on so many different body systems, and the nature of that as a risk factor for so many of the major healthcare problems, we really are in a revolution.
Right. And there's a lot of aspects of that I want to cover as we go further into the interview, so I want you to hold that idea in mind. Gari, I'd like to give the listeners an idea of what's going on from your personal story. In your book, Healing Myself, you began your story with a horrific accident. Your entire facial structure was damaged. You went through extensive reconstructive surgery, all of which was very painful and very long-winded, and lasted on the order of 8 years, am I right?
10.
Wow. And you were conscious much of the time during those surgeries. Would you mind sharing that story briefly with us?
Oh, I'd be happy to. My first book, Healing Myself, talks about that. It took 10 years to make my face again after the steering wheel demolished it in the car accident. And the wonderful gift that happened during that, at the time that I had the surgery to make me a nose, to take out one of my ribs and make a nose, someone told me about the Monroe Institute and the Surgical Support Series, which was quite new at that point. And I had the tapes to try before that surgery to see if they worked. And all the doctors and the nurses at the University of Virginia Hospital were really interested in whether these tapes would help me with pain control. The surgeries before that had been very painful and really disagreeable. And the tapes were wonderful. I never needed any pain medication. I left the hospital rapidly. I healed really fast. And I used the Hemi-Sync system from then on instead of anesthesia with the rest of the 10 years of surgeries to make me a new face. And I'm so grateful. People ask me a lot if I'm employed by the Monroe Institute, and I always laugh and say no, that my bond is one of gratitude to have that freedom from pain.
Mm-hmm.
And it truly opened a door for me that I never would have expected, because through the journey of being the healee, as I was being reconstructed, I learned to be a healer.
Right.
And that's what my new purpose in life is. A total change.
And you do that through several different methods at this point.
Yes, in the beginning I traveled and lectured with my book, and then that developed into doing workshops at large conferences. And along the way I studied a lot of different healing modalities, because I wanted to learn every possible way of healing, as well as plastic surgery and orthopedic surgery.
Yeah.
And so I studied therapeutic touch and chakra and ruffle and Reiki, and now polarity, which is like the culmination of all of it.
Justine, have you ever studied polarity therapy?
No, I've never done any research projects.
And how
on
about
polarity
things?
Therapy.
Right. How about things like Reiki and therapeutic touch, that sort of thing?
One of the center's projects is on therapeutic touch. A graduate student, doctoral student, Yishen Lin, who's from Taiwan, did her dissertation on therapeutic touch, the effects of therapeutic touch on pain in the elderly, in a number of residential facilities for the elderly in Charlottesville, and looked at the effect of therapeutic touch on stress and cortisol levels. And we have a subtle body energies project that I think is very relevant to this, and she used some of those instruments to look at the effects of therapeutic touch on energy balancing. This is a concept that runs through very many of the alternative therapies.
Kind of the Qi concept from Oriental medicine, that sort of thing?
Yeah.
When you're referring to the subtle energy.
The subtle body energies,
right. Okay.
Right. Yeah, there are very many different words for it, not just in the Eastern, although they certainly have been more of a champion of the subtle body energies, but in the Western as well. Alain Vital and the whole movement of vitalism, which was sort of scoffed at by the scientists, but it was very much alive in the Western traditions for years, and still is. It's always had its champions.
Right.
So it's really present in almost every culture that you can look at, some notion of a subtle body energy. But you can go beyond just the notion that it exists and get into more of the structure of it. And I think what the polarity therapies do, although I'm not as familiar with them certainly as Gari is to balance those energies. And the idea that when you have a balance across systems, there is an increase in your vitality or health and experience, and that all disease really can be looked at as an imbalance. And so the practitioner of these therapies uses their own energy field to move the energy field around, to put it more into balance and harmony. And that this is a very healthful, healing thing, because when the body's energies are balanced, its own natural healing capabilities are much more vital and alive. And that's really the focus of very many alternative therapies, is to unleash the body's own natural healing abilities.
Right.
And these abilities come into the fore when the energy is balanced.
And Gari, what are you conscious of when doing this type of work? Is balancing the healee's energies part of your thoughts when you're doing this?
Yes, one always goes into working on healing with an intention, and usually I talk to whoever I'm going to work on first and find out what they want to focus on, what they're feeling in their body, what their concerns are. And then I vocalize that intention as we begin. And I begin with a prayer, if that's their choice, or however they choose to word things, and I make sure I say out loud that the person and I are working together on whatever part of their body or part of their emotional makeup or mental, whatever it is they want to work on. And we talk about that as an intention before we begin. And then at the end of the session, I talk about the intention at the same time to close it and to thank the energies for being there with us, or thank whoever they choose, whatever sort of higher power they choose to relate to, then we close with that as well, so that the intention is there. And so many times, Mark, it's amazing because you simply stand there with the person without even having your hands close to them or on them, and you talk about the intention, and they can start to feel the energy move before you even get close to anything like that. It's so amazing. I'm so grateful to Monroe for opening my eyes and ears and feelings to all this, because it's a whole new world out there, the world of the future.
Justine, in the world of CSCAT, what is the response that you're getting from your fellow coworkers when you start talking about things like energy bodies, and what's the mechanism behind that? How do you talk to a practitioner of Western medicine about such a thing?
Well, there are many words that Western practitioners are comfortable with. And a lot of this, I think, in making people comfortable and feeling like this isn't something just very intangible or unreal, is to find those words. And homeostasis is one of those words that's very much a part of Western medicine. Everybody understands the body's balancing of different kinds of neurotransmitters and energies and seeking homeostasis. And that when the body is thrown out of homeostasis, it's stressful and takes energy and can lead to disease. So that's something that, people can relate to. But I think it's very, very similar to what these more esoteric traditions are talking about. It's just a different way of talking about it. And people are very familiar with the idea that you can either be too tense or anxious or agitated, or you can be too tired and fatigued. And that striking the right balance there is when you feel good, and when things flow better, and when you feel healthy. So these are ideas, like I said, that are present in the literature and just very much a part of people's experience. It's just a matter of finding the words that map from one system onto another. And the concepts are there, I think, because it is so basically important to health that everyone who's really looked into this has found those concepts. They just use different words for them.
Okay, well, and I understand that. What have you found the mechanism behind this esoteric art? Have you found a mechanism?
Well, I would like to tell you that I have all the answers. Yes,
you don't?
Yes, Mark.
Gary does.
I have the mechanism.
Good.
No, I'm sorry. We're still looking, but progress is being made. We have different ways of quantifying these energies. This is, I think, the key. Because it takes it out of the esoteric realm or the realm of description to the realm of quantification. And we're now looking at EEG, and these concepts are there in the literature as well. If you have too much beta or too much theta, this is known to be associated with disease or dysfunction. That's not anything that's alternative or complementary. So you can have too much of one or the other, and that if you bring it back into balance, then there's greater health. One thing that, another system that we're looking at is the voice, which I find very fascinating and has, I think, a lot of potential because, as you know, as a sound engineer, that the voice and all sound is very quantifiable, and you can do all kinds of amazing things with it, with the computer. The potential for analysis is very large, and there's a very rich literature on the voice in Western science. People understand that the voice tells you a lot about how the person is feeling, their stress level, or their balance or harmony. People are drawn to different voices. Now, why that is and what that does for us is something that we're still looking into, but people seek sound therapeutically in so many ways, through the voice, through music, through all kinds of sounds. And so these are ideas that are not that unfamiliar, and because voice and sound can be analyzed and quantified, we think that this is another window on the subtle body energies.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of Western literature that would support that notion. It's just another matter of translation, of saying, look at these studies and what this is showing. There's a lot of information in the voice.
Mm-hmm.
This is accepted. If we look at it in another way and put it in these terms, you can see how that could be an expression of the subtle body energy system. And when you do that, if you make those translations, I found that most Western scientists who are open-minded are interested.
Mm-hmm.
They understand that, and they can see the meaning there.
And of course, this means absolutely nothing to you, Gary. You don't care how it works. You just know that it does.
Well, I'm learning more and more about that, Mark. It's interesting because I've always gone from my feeling side and not so much from the scientific side, because I do not have a scientific background.
Right.
But in Florida, I volunteer at a wonderful place called The Pilgrimage in Largo, Florida, and they do laying on of hands, and they have volunteer healers who work with visitors, as we call them, and they do healing touch. And the healing touch that they do is mainly therapeutic touch, but it combines some Reiki and chakra unruffle and some polarity. And they're doing a study with the Harvard Medical School and the Mind Body Medical Institute, and so it's really interesting. As we work with people there, we have to do very careful analysis and write-ups afterwards so that they can fit into what's needed for the study. And so we are not allowed to put any of our feelings when we do our write-ups afterwards. We're allowed to be strictly analytically observing the visitors as to how they are before, what they say, and what their reactions are afterwards. And it's really interesting as I see all this evolving. This has been going on for the past year. And it's such a wonderful, wonderful spot. I wish that there were pilgrimages all over the country, because they do not have a fee for people who visit there. They just ask for a love offering, and everybody volunteers, and it's such a wonderful way of passing on healing.
It has a very strong sense of love in there.
A very strong sense of love.
Which, that could very well be the binding factor to why all of these things work. We started to touch on the idea of sound, and when we come back from this break, I want to talk more about that because, as you both know, it's something that's very near and dear to my heart, especially with regards to this magical thing called Hemi-Sync. The Gateway Radio program will return in just a moment.
Fascinating.
Compelling.
Profound. Engrossing.
Stimulating.
Intense.
Inspiring. Visionary.
Beyond the cutting edge.
Hampton Roads Publishing Company.
Books for the evolving human spirit.
Visit us at our website, www.hrpub.com, or call 1-800-766-8009 for a free catalog. www.hrpub.com, 1-800-766-8009.
Hampton Roads Publishing Company. The science of the mind, consciousness. Throughout human history, mankind has asked the basic questions of our existence. Who are we and where are we going? The Monroe Institute offers a unique series of programs designed to help you explore your fullest potentials and unlock the secrets of conscious awareness. Utilizing its patented Hemi-Sync technology, these week-long programs present you the opportunity to explore your own inner world and beyond. For information on the Monroe Institute, its products and services, access our website, monroeinstitute.org, or call 1-800-541-2488.
And we're back with Justine Owens, a cognitive psychologist, a clinical researcher with the CSCAT program, and Gary Carter, who's an author, a healer, practitioner of polarity therapy, Reiki, and therapeutic touch. Just before we went to the break, we started touching on the idea of sound And Justine was talking about the sound of the voice as an indication of balance. Of course, you both know that my work here at the Monroe Institute is about the use of sound, and I would like to quantify that, if I could, by saying that what the Hemi-Sync process does is also help achieve balance, homeostasis, through affecting brainwaves. You used the surgical support series, which in its infancy was called the emergency series. Specifically, you made a lot of references to the control of pain during surgery. That is correct, yes?
Totally, absolutely, and wonderful, magical.
And do you use it now in your therapy practices as polarity therapist?
I still use so many Monroe tapes and CDs. I play the music a lot. I bathe people in Hemi-Sync whenever they come to my house.
Are you the Hemi-Sync evangelist? Is that what's going on out there?
Well, you might say that. I also use remembrance a lot when I'm trying to concentrate on writing. I'm writing 3 more books at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And when I heal people at the pilgrimage, I always play Monroe music. And when I'm working at home with clients, I also use Monroe. So I do give people a choice, but I always try to talk them into Monroe, because then we all work better, because we're all balanced to begin with, and it just makes everything flow so much faster.
So the way you bring that out is you have a choice, but you're going to listen to this. Is that the way that goes?
Exactly. You have a choice, but you better choose my choice.
Well, trust me, if I'm ever on the table with you, I'll choose Monroe. Paramount, from what you told me before, is doing a follow-up to the sightings program they did on you. They're doing a 2-hour special called The Power of the Mind, in which they will be following up on your story from your accident and all of your surgeries, and talking about what it is that you're doing now. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. And this should be on shortly. I'm not sure exactly when. I haven't heard from the producer yet. But I'm the healing segment of the 2-hour special on the powers of the mind. And what they did is they filmed me healing at the pilgrimage, specifically working on this wonderful man who I've worked on for about a year, who's waiting for a liver transplant. And he's so funny, because he says he's a skeptical New Yorker and he doesn't believe any of this stuff. And he never would have gone to the pilgrimage if a friend hadn't talked him into it. And when he went the first time, I was one of the healers working on him. And I said, oh, you should get some Monroe music. That would really help you. And he said he wasn't interested in the slightest, but by the end of the time that I worked on him, he realized that if he didn't do it, that I was going to bug him afterwards.
Once again, that choice is being made.
Exactly. So he did, and he said it just changed his life in so many ways. And the reason he's still waiting for a liver transplant is he has a very unusual blood type. They haven't been able to match it up yet. And his doctors accused him of having a hidden liver somewhere that he hasn't shown them.
A hidden liver?
Because he's doing so well. He's not yellow. He really looks great. And so he was interviewed for this program as well, and he told that story about how he was a skeptical New Yorker. And he was doing fine with his sessions at the pilgrimage and listening to Monroe and still waiting for his transplant and doing fine.
That's wonderful.
So it's interesting. And also with that segment, they will be focusing on Monroe as well and on the powers of Hemi-Sync and how that works to tie that all in with this particular patient. It's all set and all ready to go just once they get a date for it to be on the air.
And Justine, Hemi-Sync is part of the CSCAT study. What exactly are you using Hemi-Sync for in all of the CSCAT studies? I mean, it's pretty multifaceted. So,
well, CSCAT has very many different projects, and the Hemi-Sync is part of several different projects. One is looking at the effects of Hemi-Sync on, or binaural beats, on the EEG and pain and mood in chronic low back pain patients. This is being done through the General Clinical Research Center in the hospital. And we have other projects, collaborative projects that are off-site, and with Al Dannenberg in South Carolina looking at the effects of Hemi-Sync on the control of dental pain and recovery. So it's more like a surgical support, but it's using metamusic.
Mm-hmm.
And that's similar to a project in Montreal looking at the effects of Hemi-Sync for the control of anxiety. And both of those studies are looking at music with and without binaural beats.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a pretty strong comparison because, as we know, music also is therapeutic.
Absolutely.
There are many
sure.
studies that show that, and so you're really putting binaural beats sort of head-to-head with something that
Mm-hmm.
we know is very, very therapeutic. So it's looking to see if adding binaural beats to music has an additional therapeutic effect.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are important studies
Yeah.
to see what the effects of adding binaural beats is. We've been talking with Columbia Presbyterian. They use the surgical support series quite a lot in their complementary care center where they do a lot of cardiac surgery.
Mm-hmm.
They've done some informal surveys, and patients are really very pleased with those tapes. They are also looking at memory during anesthesia, which is very interesting to see.
How do you mean? Whether or not the patient actually remembers some of the events in the operating room?
Well, they're doing sort of standard cognitive psychology type studies, which really surprised me. They're giving people word lists while they're undergoing surgery and testing their memory for those words.
What type of preliminary findings are they coming up with?
They're showing that there is evidence of memory during anesthesia. There's actually quite a long history of studies. It's not a very large literature, but people have been interested in this question for many, many years.
Right, right.
And there are some positive indications, and they're finding some positive indications. They're using a more contemporary type protocol. It's called an implicit memory study,
Mm-hmm.
where you don't ask people to consciously recall the words. You look at what's called priming. So you give them two pairs of words, and what they show is that the pairs that they've heard in surgery are ones that they're more likely to free associate to afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pretty subtle but very effective measure of what's called implicit or unconscious awareness.
Mm-hmm. But did I hear you say that Hemi-Sync was being used to see if they could enhance the memory?
They're also, yes, this is, they just submitted this protocol to their internal review,
Uh-huh.
and they're looking at Hemi-Sync as well.
Uh-huh.
They have quite a good team of researchers up there, a very well-known cognitive psychologist, Lynn Cooper, and Mehmet Oz is very prolific in his cardiac surgeries.
Right.
They had an abstract of this published in Circulation, which is one of the core biomedical journals. So it's quite an interesting team up there. And because they use the Monroe Surgical Support Series, they're including that in the study because they have found
Sure.
such positive results. Speaking of skeptical New Yorkers, they told me a story that really amused me. They offer these complementary therapies to their patients, and one of them, I think, was a coach, and he was pretty hard-nosed, pretty externally oriented, and he basically refused all of them. They offer therapeutic touch and hypnosis
Right, right.
and Hemi-Sync tapes, and he's like, no, I don't want any of that stuff.
He didn't want to play.
None of that stuff, none of it. But as the day approached for his surgery, he was becoming more and more anxious, and he's, I think, also observing that other people are using these therapies and benefiting from it. So at the last minute, he says, all right, give it all to me. I'll take it all.
Then you can have Gary come in and save the day there.
So,
That's wonderful.
yeah, he just wanted to jump right in there and no testing of the waters.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
So, and he did report a benefit, but they explained it to him more in terms that he could understand, in sports psychology.
Right.
People in sports understand the relationship of stress and performance.
Sure.
And when they explained it as just relaxing and getting more into a balanced state and harmonious and feeling good, he's like, oh, well, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
That I can understand. So I think a lot of it has to do with a lot of the incorporation of the Western medicine with these more esoteric techniques has to do with how it's talked about and how it's framed.
Yeah. Well,
You use the language of the person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and
sure.
it's acceptable to them.
Mm-hmm.
That's so true.
Gary, how do you work with that? I'm sure that from time to time, as you were saying, you had your skeptical New Yorker friend there. From time to time, you run into people who are probably brought to you to be working with, and they just think a lot of this is nonsense. I mean, how do you work with them?
Well, it's amazing how many people are attracted, and when you're a bionic woman, it's different. It's always amazing to me as I travel because people with facial injuries hide from the public because you can't hide your face with clothing the way you can other parts of your body.
Right.
And so by having a few scars on my chin, I'm that much more believable to people. They look at me and they realize I've been through something, so they can tell me whatever they've been through,
Right.
and I'll understand right away.
Mm-hmm.
And so no matter what their background is, they look at me, and it's almost like having a badge of courage on my chin.
Mm-hmm. She's been there, done that,
Right.
that sort of thing.
And
right.
so they think, well, this is okay, I can talk to this person. And they kind of let down some of their armor right away.
Mm-hmm.
You can always tell when somebody is afraid. They cross their arms across their chest right away,
Sure.
which closes off the heart chakra, and it's like putting on armor and protecting themselves from the world.
Mm-hmm.
And generally, if you just listen and don't comment a whole lot in the beginning, but just ask them what it is they want, and they start talking slowly, you'll see that their arms will relax,
Right.
and they'll look more open. So
Face softens, that sort of thing.
right. I just try to be accepting and open and breathe through my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing. Another thing I use a lot, like one time at the pilgrimage, we had this lady come in who was very, very angry. And she, in our initial interview, spent most of the time yelling, and she was very, very angry.
Mm-hmm.
And I started doing what's called the mother's breath, which is a classical calming breath. And I did that through my heart center. I breathed in and out through my heart. And the mother's breath, you breathe in for a count of 7, and then you hold for a count of 1, and you breathe out for a count of 7, and then you hold for 1.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever anybody's angry, they're usually breathing very quickly in an agitated way.
Right.
And by breathing yourself in a very calming rhythm,
Mm-hmm.
that slowly calms them down as well. Until then, they're able to talk in a more rational,
It's
calm
almost like
way.
a sympathetic resonance going on there.
Exactly. It's just like Hemi-Sync, but doing it with the
Mhm.
breath.
Would you say that's an underlying current in your work?
Yes, totally.
Do you think that you're working on a spiritual level?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes. And
And-
I never would have thought, gosh, Mark, 15, 20 years ago, I never would have thought we'd be having this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting. I belong to 4 different healing orders, one of which is the Dolphin Energy
Mm-hmm.
through Monroe, and all of them really focus the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And I know when I've lectured at churches, they've asked me if I am focused on religion or on spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that all religions are the same and that I am more focused on spirituality because we truly are all one.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can breathe in a calming way and help someone else achieve that balance and that peace of mind, then that's what it's all about. It's, however we can reach out to help other people.
Brings them back to stasis, as Justine was saying before.
Exactly.
And that seems to be the underlying current in the work that you're doing there. When we were off break, you were talking about the acupuncture meridian inventory. Is this what exactly is that?
That's another one of the devices that we're using in our what we call our Subtle Body Energies project.
Mm-hmm.
And it was selected, as were the others, because of its potential for quantifying subtle body energy. It's a device that was invented by Dr. Motoyama in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And what it does is gives numeric readout for the different acupuncture meridians and defines health or quantifies it in terms of their balance.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has a numeric output and a graphical output which look like circles. And basically a person who's very balanced has very round circles, And a person whose different meridians are out of balance, you'd see sort of a crimp inward or outward.
How do you see these circles? I'm trying to...
Well, it's very, it's computer output.
I see. Okay.
Right.
So the computer actually is monitoring these points and makes a representation of these meridians. Okay.
You put electrodes on the well points on the fingers and toes in very specific places. Mm-hmm. And then a very, very mild current is passed through the body. Mm-hmm. That's not discernible by the person. And then the device computes the flow of electricity through the body, through the acupuncture meridians, and you actually get 3 parameters. It's sort of the rise time and the fall time of the electric current as it passes through the meridians, and you get output numeric and this graphic picture that gives you sort of a full look at how balanced the systems are overall in relation to the other, one to the other, and pinpoints different organ systems or different meridian, energy flow meridians that are either too strong or too weak.
Gotcha.
And gives recommendations for treatment. Well, we look at this more from a research perspective to look at how these different devices relate one to the other, but it's also very potentially useful as an outcome measure. So you could imagine a study where you test the person, get their acupuncture meridians, and then give them some therapy, whether it's Reiki or therapeutic touch or sound or any of the many therapies that are balancing energy.
And you do work with a lot of them, right?
Yes.
I mean, right down to the magnets on the acupuncture meridians and all. Yeah.
Yes. Well, that's another one. Many of them, you ask about the mechanism. Well, when you read about what is said, they say very, very similar things as we've been talking about. And it has to do with energy balancing. And so this device gives you a quantified way to look at those effects and see what's, happening before and after pictures.
Right. That's fascinating stuff. When we come back, I want to try to shift the perspectives a little bit. We're going to play with the spiritual realm for you, and we're going to shift over Gari and let her be more of a scientist. The Gateway Radio program will return in just a moment.
Peace of mind. For some, an elusive goal in today's hectic environment. For some, a way of life. Hemi-Sync, a patented audio guidance technology developed by the Monroe Institute, has been facilitating peace of mind for thousands of people worldwide for over 30 years. This unique combination of carefully sequenced sound patterns promotes the optimum brainwave responses for relaxation. Hemi-Sync has been proven safe and effective in clinical applications where a relaxing environment is necessary. Isn't it time you have your own peace of mind? For more information about the many fine Hemi-Sync products, access our website at monroeinstitute.org or call 1-800-541-2488.
Hi, this is Frank DeMarco, Chairman of Hampton Roads Publishing Company. Since 1989, Hampton Roads has been publishing titles on a variety of cutting-edge topics. Visionary fiction uplifts the spirit and promotes metaphysical understanding. Alternative medicine promotes gentler, more effective tools for wellness. And metaphysics gives insights into out-of-body experiences, past lives, prophecy, and Toltec shamanism. Hampton Roads gives you the books that you really want but won't find anywhere else. Visit our website, www.hrpub.com. That's www.hrpub.com. Or call 1-800-766-8009 for a free catalog. 1-800-766-8009. Hampton Roads Publishing Company. Books for the evolving human spirit.
Back with Justine Owens and Gary Carter. Before we went to the break, we were talking about a possibility of shifting hats. And the idea came when Justine was talking about seeing the computer representations of acupuncture points. My lip doesn't work today. My acupuncture points. Gary, since your surgery and all of the work that you've done on a spiritual and healing level, one of the things that you use to detect somebody's overall health and well-being is auric fields. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that that is your diagnostic method?
One of many diagnostic methods that I use. I find my hands are incredibly sensitive now, and I feel a lot more through my fingertips since I've been studying polarity.
Mm-hmm.
But I also feel in my body, I feel physically whatever someone else has a hurt, whatever part they hurt.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that physically in my body. And in the beginning, I would feel it for a long time and have a hard time letting go of it. Now I take it in and I let it go back out.
You mean you kind of empathically take it into yourself?
Yes.
I see.
Yes, so that if somebody, for example, I was interviewing somebody the other day before I worked on them, and she was telling me where she had arthritic pain.
Mm-hmm.
And as she was telling me and talking about her knees and her hips, I felt a pain in my right forearm in my own body. Mm-hmm. And I waited till she finished talking about all the places where she had pain in her body, and then I asked her about her right arm. And she gave me this funny look, and she said, well, that's where it all started.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it does still hurt there. So I do feel inside my body. But I look at the person's aura, and I always do that before I start working on them, because most auras are very skinny and teeny. And then after I've worked on somebody, usually their aura is all fluffed up, and it looks really pretty and big and shiny and much, much better. And actually there's a funny story with Justine, if it's okay to tell it. Well, you were there too, Mark. Last summer at the Monroe Institute's professional seminar, I gave a workshop on how to see the human energy field, or the aura. Mm-hmm. And Justine was there, and Mark was there, as well as a lot of other scientists. And so I showed everybody in 3 easy steps how to see auras, and everybody could see my aura as I showed them. And a lot of the scientists were quite convinced that they would not be able to. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way at all, but they were just quite convinced that this was something too far out and it wasn't going to work for them. So then I paired everybody up afterwards so they got to practice on each other. But Mark went around, you remember, with the microphone afterwards playing Phil Donahue, to ask people what they had seen as they were watching my aura, as I made it get bigger for them and show them the 3 easy steps to see auras. And Justine gave the most wonderful, wonderful comment, which I'll never forget as long as I live. Do you want to tell it, Justine, or shall I?
Well, I can say it, is that when I looked at you and you were wearing a long robe that was light-colored, and then I saw the aura, which was very bright, all around your head and body, it just brought me back to my childhood when I saw, used to have the holy cards. And you looked like a holy card that had come to life. And it was really a wonderful experience because I didn't have to worry about quantifying it or making sure somebody else, I could prove it to them, or it was just the experience of it.
Very personalized.
But it was so real. But it wasn't about proof. It was about experience. And I'd always wanted to see an aura. I wasn't skeptical of it. I was eager to see it. I really just wanted to feel what it was like, and it was such a wonderful thing to really have such a pretty picture.
Yeah.
It was a very sacred picture, and it brought back that experience as a child, because I think children can feel these things more. And there's research evidence that shows that children are just more, they're more hypnotic, they have more hypnotic capability. They live in a different, less analytic world,
right?
More experiential,
right?
And they can have the experience of the sacred, I think, a lot more easily than in this skeptical society. So I just felt like I was transported back to that, and just being in a room too with people who were all feeling the same thing was great.
I had a conversation with Charles Tart recently during an interview, and he uses this word scientism to define science as being the new religion of sorts. And our researchers are actually trained to not pay any attention to the magic involved that we all experience as children. We know that it's undefined currently. It's quantified through reductionism, and we tend to lose sight of the larger picture. Now, one of the interesting things that happens to these researchers, there's this strange dichotomy of these things are okay to study, we really don't believe them, and if we can prove them, instead of doing pure science of proof or disproof, if we can prove them, I really don't want to look at that evidence.
Well,
I don't want that evidence attacking my belief system.
If you don't mind, I'd like to do a little bit of energy balancing right now.
Please do.
Which is to say that there are so many scientists who are driven by the love of what they're studying.
Mm-hmm.
And in my mind, these are the best scientists.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a cultural stereotype, of the cold-hearted, reductionistic, defensive scientists. And sometimes I see these on television, and it really annoys me.
Yeah, sure.
It's just not accurate, because when you get to the highest levels of science and you look at the breakthroughs that have been made, there's an excellent paper by Roger Shepard in the Stanford Psychology Department on the image and the act of creation, and he tries to balance out this stereotype and show that so many of the discoveries, the breakthrough discoveries, were made by scientists who were very much balanced and in touch with their emotions and in touch with their imaginal worlds. Tesla and Kekulé and Benzing Ring and Edison. And Einstein has such a wealth, there's so many quotes of his on the value of the mystical and the spiritual experience and its relationship to science, but still the stereotype exists. And
where did this stereotype begin, I guess, is the big question.
Well, there are some scientists who are defensive. I can give you a little story that illustrates this. It was at a conference on alternative therapy, and there were positive results on homeopathic medicine, very strong results.
Right.
And it just really bothered so many people in the audience. And one of them stood up and said, even if that were true, I wouldn't believe it. Which really is sort of making I don't even think he realized what a joke he was making of his own belief system.
Right.
But they're there, that's true.
But I'm wondering,
but it's not all of science. If you really look at the history of science, that's not really what it's all about.
That's true.
People have their limitations.
Right.
And for some reason, that stereotype gets put out in the media. It's simplistic. People like simple stories, too, and you have to have something to, I don't know, knock down or whatever.
Right.
And I'm not saying that these people aren't there, like I said, but if you really look at the history of science, that's not really what it's all about.
That's very true. There
is a strong, I think, emotional tie, and that's what energy balancing is all about. When the mind and the spirit and the heart are one, that is where the great discoveries and breakthroughs have come from.
Right. Well, and again, he made the distinction between scientists and scientism. Scientism is this stereotype that just has very rigid boundaries.
It's limited and rigid.
Will not go. I'm wondering just where that comes from. Again, I just always want to question why things are the way.
I think a lot of it has to do with fear. That's the way I look at it, is that a lot of it is overwhelming, and that people have different abilities to, or emotional groundedness to deal with things that are very overwhelming. And so one of the ways that they cope with that is just to put it aside or deny, if you will, that it's there.
Right.
It's a natural human coping mechanism.
Well, as I admitted to Charlie, I'm not sure that I'd want to be psychic. I think it's scary to some degree. I'm sufficiently psychic in that I can deal with my own intuition.
I think that control is very important too. People who feel like they can control it, they can turn it on and turn it off, are more willing to explore.
Right.
People who don't feel like they have that control are less willing to go and explore because they're afraid that they won't be able to do that. But some people have more of a, you can call it self-regulation strategies or skills. I mean, there's some very Western ways of talking about that. Some people have those abilities. They can control it. They can turn it on and have all these wonderful experiences, and they can turn it off. They're like Olympic athletes when it comes to consciousness. And so because they have that control, they're not afraid. And that's natural.
That brings up a really interesting question. Where do you draw the line with reading people's thoughts? If we are, in fact, moving in a human evolutionary scale into becoming more psychic, becoming more whole, more holistic in general between body, mind, and spirit, what is going to be the implication of that? And, what is our race going to look like in the next 100 years? I think it's going to be a real interesting time. We're all going to look like Gari.
I think we'll all still be very individuals in our own ways, but the way I look at that, Mark, is I used to think that my job in life was to heal everybody and make everybody's life perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't do that anymore. I've realized that what's important is to do what people want. I ask what people choose, what they yearn for, what they truly want. And if they have some physical problem that they don't mention, I don't bring that up.
Right.
Because that's not their choice, and they're the one who's living in their own body. I'm not. It's very important to honor and to pay attention to people's wants and desires,
mm-hmm.
and to stay with that, not to go beyond that. And I think that we all have responsibilities of that, not to impinge on someone else's space,
mm-hmm.
but to stay within your own energy field. And sure, it would be lovely to heal the world and take care of everything, boom, like that. But it's important to honor each individual self along the way.
If you could encapsulate that idea into one word, would that word be compassion?
Yes.
Clinically, do you ever study this as a science, compassion? Would you equate what's being done energetically with compassion? Do you think bedside manner of physicians and surgeons, compassionate bedside manner, makes a tremendous difference?
Yes. You haven't mentioned, I'll mention now that the center is based in the School of Nursing.
Mm-hmm.
And nursing has a long history.
Yes, Angels of Mercy.
Yes.
Right.
The caring touch and compassion. And there are many, many nurses who make this their life's work, mm-hmm. both, in the hospitals and more academically, to try to quantify and do research on caring and compassion.
Mm-hmm.
There are very many people who have focused on that. It's difficult to quantify, but there's a broad recognition that it is real. And I think as the more mind-body awareness comes into being, the gifts that nurses have given to patients for all these many years will become more recognized for what they are and the value of them for health.
Mm-hmm.
You can imagine the kinds of studies that you could do,
yeah.
trying to quantify the caring touch, looking at cortisol levels
mm-hmm.
before and after and all those
sure.
kinds of things. But it's a very difficult thing, I think, to really do science on compassion,
mm-hmm.
because the moments are so ephemeral in a way that I think it's one of those cases where when you observe it and try to measure it, you could very well interfere with it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I think, like psychical research, it's more challenging, I should say that, scientifically,
mm-hmm.
to try to structure those experiments because they come largely from the heart.
Right.
And it's hard to program the heart to to be where it's supposed to be at the time it's supposed to be there. They can be done. I'm not saying they can't be done. I would question the value of them myself. I think there has to be more of a global awareness and a consciousness of them, and that we really don't need science to measure caring and compassion. I mean, there may be people who would disagree with that, but that's not where my scientific interests lie.
I experienced a very good example of that. Dr. Milton Edgerton at the University of Virginia was the plastic surgeon who created my second face.
Right.
And he is the most caring, compassionate, kind gentleman I think I will ever meet in my entire life. And he always made a point every time I went in for a consultation or saw him for surgery or anything, he would always come and immediately put his hand on my shoulder and say my name and ask how I was and ask what my concerns were. And I was so touched by his caring manner. I remember talking to the nurse practitioner in that department who arranged all the schedulings and took care of the families and did all the little extra things. And she said it was so interesting watching interns and residents come in for a rotation with Dr. Edgerton, because they would be filled with the outside world and the outside ways of acting and behaving. And then after a rotation with Dr. Edgerton, they would all be infused with compassion and kindness. And she said, as she observed them over the years in other departments, she would see that that had not rubbed off, that that stayed with them, that that lesson was learned to the bone of their being, so that it always was with them. And I thought, what a wonderful gift that Dr. Edgerton passed on to all those other doctors, like ripples. And it's yes, and as you say, Justine, it can't really be quantified, but this nurse practitioner had observed it very clinically over the years, and she saw such a difference. And I realized then how that's so important for us to do to everyone in our lives.
Well, you know, as soon as I said that, I wanted to take the words back. You know, scientists saying you can't quantify that.
Well, no, but you can. How can you?
I ran across a study when I reviewed the voice analysis literature, which is a lot to do with infants and mother interactions, but there are all different kinds of studies that have been done, like looking, analyzing the voice of a pilot before a crash, you know, to assess that stress. And looking at interviewers, which people were able to keep people on the phone during those somewhat annoying surveys that they do at dinner time, to see, you know, the harmonic structure of their voices, because some people are very successful at that. Well, one researcher looked at doctor-patient interactions and looked at the voice of the doctor. And I think that could be a way to measure it, because you can give people energy through your voice. And you can communicate all kinds of things through your voice, some of them, you know, more negative to positive, and that could be a way to quantify that relationship. When the doctor comes in and just says those few caring words, if they're in the right key and the right richness, it could have a tremendous healing. And the patients just respond to that intuitively. They know that really means that all of that caring and that message gets through. It's like you said with Dr. Edgerton. I mean, those effects are very long-lasting. It's not a fleeting thing.
Right.
And so that would be an interesting study.
And I'm wondering if it's key and harmonic structure or simply intention, which counts for an awful lot. Gary Carter's book is entitled Healing Myself, and it's available through Hampton Roads Publishing. Justine Owens is a cognitive psychologist and researcher involved with the CSCAT programs, doing the work in the trenches in what I hope will one day be breakthrough work in discovering the hidden potentials of what is for now being considered alternative therapies. Ladies, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having us on.
It's my pleasure. Tune in for our next program. My guest will be author, philosopher, and researcher Colin Wilson. Till then, may peace and good health be yours. Good night, all.
Be certain to tune in next week to the Gateway Radio program and become informed on the latest information on the fascinating field of consciousness exploration and its practical applications. The opinions and the views of the guests are presented to inform you on various phenomena in our world and are not necessarily in accordance with the views of the producers or the Monroe Institute. For more information on the Gateway Radio program, write to Gateway Radio, care of the Monroe Institute, 62 Roberts Mountain Road, Faber, Virginia, 22938. This edition of the Gateway Radio program is the exclusive property of the Monroe Institute, copyright 1997, and is broadcast by permission. Any unauthorized broadcast or duplication of this program is prohibited by law. Thank you for listening.